Well, good morning to everyone, and I want to tell you all out there what's happening here today. We have a live classroom with us. It is a class it's from high school, and they are the students of our Holocaust Educator of the Year, who is Mr. Nick Haberman. He's here in the back of the room. This is a difficult time for us to be doing this. Of course, we've been planning this program for the better part of a year. We had no way of knowing what would happen in our city over the weekend. We are all deeply in mourning for the 11 people who were killed at a synagogue during Shabbat on Saturday, and we're dedicating today's program to them. We have a two-part program today. First, you will hear from Magda Brown, whom the people in the room have already met, and then this afternoon, we're going to show technology that comes from the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. We have an educator here with us named Megan Gieseker. Welcome, Megan. She will show this incredible technology that's been developed in Los Angeles and is in a special theater in Skokie near Chicago. And a lot of people call it the hologram. We're not going to have a hologram here because we can't project in 3 dimensions, but we are going to have an interactive testimony, and people who are watching online will be able to send questions to us, which we will ask the hologram. It's hard to describe, you'll have to see it. It's a wonderful technology that brings these testimonies to life, and they will live on for decades and decades this way. And we're excited to bring it to Pittsburgh. This is the second virtual seminar that we've done. And the virtual seminar program was brought to us through the generosity of the Earl Surloff Fund at the Jewish Federation. We have a couple other sponsors that I would like to acknowledge before we get started. Jewish Women's Foundation is sponsoring our year of programming, which is about women and the Holocaust. We were able to bring our guests through generosity from Chatham University's Women's Institute. All of our survivor lectures this year are sponsored by the Snow Fund, and we're really grateful for that support. We have a series of speakers. We call the series the Generation Speaker Series. I think I neglected to introduce myself because everyone in this room knows me, but people out there may not. My name is Lauren Bairnsfather. I'm the director of the Holocaust Center. We do important work here. We educate about the Holocaust, and we also speak out against anti-Semitism. Now more than ever, after the events of a couple of days ago, we need to stand up to this kind of hatred. It's the duty of all of us to make it clear that this will not stand, not in our city, not in our country. So thank you all for tuning in. It is my absolute pleasure to turn the microphone back over to Magda Brown.
Thank you very much. You did a fantastic introduction.
Thank you.
And she worked so hard. Anyhow, good morning all, and I am trying to inform you about the past. The Holocaust was the 20th century's worst tragedy. Why? Because the Holocaust was a premeditated, scientifically coordinated mass murder. After all, people die of natural death, of debilitating illnesses, but not being ordered to be killed. Okay? So how did all this develop? I grew up in Hungary, and I was just like any of you kids. Somewhere I have a photo of my teenage years to show you that I didn't have 2 heads or whatever silliness. I was just as a happy-go-lucky child as any of you are here. I did my homework, I didn't do my homework, I hung out with the kids. I mean, all the stuff that you're doing 70 years later wasn't any different. Maybe you have all the modern technology, but otherwise it was the same thing. So what happens when all this happiness turns 90 degrees? And from a youngster, it becomes a very mature 17-year-old. All of you are close to that age. So let's do a little bit of history to build up where I am. All of you have studied World War II history already, and you have heard of this terribly bad man called Hitler, who rose to power in Germany, and the people listened to his voice and his brainwashing. His dislike of people were immense. He didn't like the homosexuals. He didn't like the Jehovah's Witnesses. He didn't like the Catholic priests. But most fervently, he disliked the Jewish people. So in Germany, from 33 on, when he came to power, they started enacting anti-Jewish discriminatory laws. And these were built gradually. And I have emphasized this section of it to you to make you understand that in today's mixed up world, genocide doesn't happen from one minute to the next. It builds gradually. And this is why I preach over and over again, that next to your health, the most important commodity you have is freedom. We are blessed to live in a free country. Work everything in your power to protect it. Once you lose your freedom, you lost everything. So, back to Hungary. As I said, I was a teenager, everything was going fine. And by March 1944, Hitler decided that Hungary hasn't done anything with his famous line, the final solution. So the Nazis literally walked into Hungary. There was no resistance from the Hungarian military or police. And in 51 days, they were able to move people out of their home through the ghetto to Auschwitz concentration camp. It was meticulously organized because there was a people mover in the Nazi party called Adolf Eichmann. And he has been doing this people moving for 10 years already. So obviously he had the down to the last dot. So he came in with just, like I said, a small group of Nazi soldiers, and the order was immediately to wear the Star of David on our lapel. It had to be sewn on. Without that, you were not permitted to go out on the street or anywhere. Ironically, even tiny little children who really didn't know what's going on, they had to have this yellow star sewn onto their clothing. So, another week, new order. All the Jewish people from the surrounding communities like suburbs, farm areas, will be brought into a ghetto, which was created in the nearest big city. Here I do a little English lesson. In America, the word ghetto is kind of understood that it's an ethnic group that decides to reside in a community. So they call it a ghetto in some locations. But in real life, ghetto is something totally different. So how does that work? We get the order that the people will be moved into this ghetto location in the big city. I happen to be born in the area in the big city that would become the ghetto, which translates to that my home is part of the ghetto district. So we remained in our home, but our home had my parents, my brother and I, and an aunt and uncle who lived with us, which means 6 people. It was a comfortable home, room for everyone. Now, the police marches in all these very, very tired people who walked on foot to come in from the suburbs or wherever distance areas. No such a luxury as a train ride or a car pool or any of that stuff that we are so accustomed to. So now the police looks into my house and shoves a bunch of people here. He makes an executive decision. I don't know the details, how he decided how many will go into that house, but my home became the residency for 40 people. You cannot fathom the crowded condition, both physically and psychologically. Physically, they were exhausted because who knows how many miles they had to walk on foot. And psychologically, all of a sudden, if nothing, they had to find a little corner to put their tired body down on the floor. And naturally, it was crowded. Now, psychologically, every personality description that you study in Psychology 1, it was there. There was the quiet one, the cursing one, the praying one, all there. So everybody, it was like a Tower of Babel, you know, just a chaos of human behavior. Oh, now finally the ghetto is settled in. Once all the people were incarcerated in the ghetto, there was no longer out. Obviously, we had no more jobs. We couldn't go to schools anymore. And we couldn't even go back to our original homes. So once we were taken out of our original homes, we never, ever got anything back from its belongings. And after all, I didn't even my home. I mean, it was a well-furnished home of normalcies, of paintings or extras. I mean, just like any of your houses, no difference. So now I'm going to touch upon another section, which is called the legal robbery and the illegal robbery. Okay, the legal robbery was, as I told you, that they stole all our belongings. Okay, it's gone. You have nothing left. Okay, then comes the illegal robbery. The Hungarian Nazi Party was comprised of a bunch of young, uneducated hoodlums. And the propaganda through brainwashing was very effective. Brainwashing. And today there's even more power in the brainwashing because of the high-tech communication. But nevertheless, we didn't have that, but it still worked. They were called the Aerocross Party. And they were a bunch of brutal young men. I mean, ugly. So now these punks would come into the fully furnished homes, and whatever the little eyes saw, it was a nice painting or a silver tray or anything of value, they just walked out with it. So I call this the illegal robbery. And then, of course, the government took away all our other belongings, so that was the legal robbery. So all this was taking place over and over and over. And now we are incarcerated in this ghetto. And all of a sudden, we get an order that we are needed for labor in another country. So we figured, okay, this is the height of the Second World War. It's almost like it feels like it will end soon. So we can understand that the countries have their manpower at the war, so they need helpers. So we figured we'll go to work in another country, do our job, come home, and life will resume. Unfortunately, that was untrue, but it had a very powerful psychological reaction. Think about it. If you are told to do this job, you don't think any further that this is a lie. You just accept it as it is. But you see, they did this to keep us calm. So would you want to resist when you just have to go and work somewhere? No. Which meant that the transportation from your ghetto to Auschwitz concentration camp went very smoothly. So now we have to evacuate the ghetto, and they march us to the other part of the city, to a brickyard. We can't figure out why in heaven's name would they bring us to a brickyard where there is absolutely nothing there except bricks and an open field. There are no toiletries, there's no running water. Aha. Remember what I said? Everything was scientifically coordinated. The brickyard was adjacent to the railroad tracks. And I have here a photo somewhere, I'll show you later, of the actual cattle car that they shoved us in. Now, when you are in Chicago and happen to visit our Holocaust Museum, they have an authentic cattle car on display in-house. And many times when I am touring with a group of students, I send them inside and I say, okay, children, tell me how many people would fit into this space. So I get the comments, oh, 30, 32, 35. That's as high as they will go. That's what their what their eyes see. I said, okay, how would you like to be squashed together between 70 to 75 human beings with their itty-bitty little overnight bag, because that's all we had, like a 3-day provision. It was so crowded, children, that once they slammed the door on us, this is already, matter of fact, it was my 17th birthday on June 11th. So now they shoved us into this kettle car, they slammed the door on us, and the kettle car has a window not bigger than our little computer frame or something like that, old TV frame or something like that. So even that had a barbed wire across it. Even a baby could have crawled through, but even that was protected. So now the train starts going, like I said, the journey took 3 days. I stood shifting one way to another in order to allow my parents to sit on the wooden floor. The train is traveling through the Carpathian Mountains, which is located between Hungary and Czechoslovakia. June, visualize the most lush, beautiful green meadow. And at that point, I happen to get to the little window, and I look out, and I see a shepherd in the distance minding his flock. And in my deranged mind, I couldn't understand how come he's there and I am here. See, at that point, I thought that the entire world was locked up in a boxcar. Through the shock of happening, I am not a psychologist to analyze that, but the fact is that that was my impression. So now the train travels on a very slow pace, because remember, this is the height of the war, so the military trains were taking priority on the railroad yards. So on occasions like this, they would take our trains to the back of the railroad yard, and we would be just staying steady. And sometimes a person who was near the window would take a little cup and put her hand out for somebody who passes by for a sip of water. Because children, of all the physical pain, the absolute worst is thirst. You cannot fathom, and you should never, ever experience what thirst can do to you. It is so overpowering that you can't think straight. You absolutely, the only thing you have in your mind, if I could only have a sip of water. Your lips are dry, just everything from your mind goes away. Just if I could have that water. So that's why I tell the audience that in my good life now, I never want to be cold, hungry, or thirsty again. So now finally, we arrive to an unknown location, because they don't tell you where we're going. So they open up the doors of the boxcar, we get out, and we are greeted by two kinds of people. One, a group of soldiers, we were unfamiliar their background, they were Nazi soldiers. But the other group of in striped uniforms were former prisoners. These were men who were helping us to get out and get going and so on. Oh, by the way, we were given an order, leave your overnight bag in the car, in the train, and you'll get it later. Later never comes. So the last stitch of personal belongings remains on the train, which we found out much later. These striped men's job was to empty the train of belongings and sort them. Matter of fact, that section in Auschwitz was called Canada. I don't know why, but that's how they named it. And there they had mountains of clothing that was collected, shoes, and other important things. And sometimes it has happened that I heard post-war, where one of these prisoners whose job was to empty these belongings would find family photos of his relatives. It was a very, very painful experience. Anyhow, so now we have absolutely nothing but the clothes on our back, and people, they don't talk to you anymore. You are worse than an animal. They motion you, this and this. And ironically, in Hungary, most of us spoke fluent German. So we could have understood if they spoke in German, but no more. We are just nothing. They're not a human being. You treat your dog better than we were treated at that point. So now we exit the car, and then the order is to line up, and they take the men and they order them in this line. And that's the last time I see my father or any of the male relatives. Now there are women and children. So now we line up 5 abreast, and in front of us are a group of Nazi officers, and Dr. Mengele, who was the chief killer of the Holocaust era, stands there and points at you. And my very young-looking mother is holding on to me, and that was enough indication to separate us. So my mother is directed that way. And I made a motion to her. I said, Mother, I'll see you later. I don't know what's happening. Unfortunately, later never comes. So now we have this group of people, and they put us into an empty room, disrobe completely. Fold up your clothes neatly on the floor. You're going to have a shower, and you should know where you left your clothing. Could say, okay, fine, we'll do it. And as we are approaching the next room, some girls are coming out from the adjacent room, and they are screaming from the top of their lungs. And they look so funny, like almost you feel like laughing. Why? Their head was shaven bald, and the body hair was shaven. And if that's not bad enough, they sprayed disinfectant on the freshly shaven skin. But we don't know this at this moment, but we just see these girls. So of course, 5 minutes later, we are in the identical position. Matter of fact, we looked so unrecognizable that it took like a couple of hours and we got to know our friends. So the only way we could recognize one another in the beginning, look in the eyes and hear the voice. And someone then, made the connection. So now we had this, what they call a shower. Forget about the shower you took at your lovely home this morning. There was nothing more than a trickle of water reaching your absolutely smelly body. Okay? There's no such thing as soap, towels, or clean underwear, zero. They put us into, wet as we were, into another room, and there were a mountain of clothing. I mean, to the ceiling, all shapes of clothing. A person is behind it and throws a garment at you. They don't look at you, are you tall, short, skinny, fat, zero. Well, I ended up with a long slip that they used to wear in the ball gown era, with long dresses and it looked horrible. And it didn't fit me. So, and then for the shoes they took away from us, and they have given us, the best way I can describe it is flip-flops that had wooden sole, and it had a leather band on the top of the foot to hold on to. It was the most difficult thing to learn to walk in it. Matter of fact, to this day, 73 years later, I still have a scar on my left foot where that leather band rubbed out the skin. And by the way, there was no such a luxury as getting an aspirin or a cream or any of the medical help, zero. So you suffer through, you go through the infection stages. Somehow the body is so strong that helps itself. So now we have gotten to the place called Auschwitz. And we really had no knowledge about these things because, first of all, I was a teenager. How much do you know about other countries' happenings? But the older people have heard there were 2 men on the entire history who has escaped Auschwitz in the earlier time. And they managed to come into Hungary and directed it to the Jewish communities what is taking place. And they would not be able to believe it. I mean, the atrocities that happened within that camp, they said they're just lying or something. It was an unbelievable phenomenon. But nevertheless, so now we are in Auschwitz, we were shaved and we were bathed, and they put us into a room that maybe, would be comfortable for about 250 people. They managed to put in 500. So now there's no such a luxury as a bed or covers or any of that stuff. Scientifically, they laid us down 100 in a row. So we were 500 at that point. And I mean, there were many more, but 500 in this group. And we were laid down like sardines in the can. The body heat from the next person was your blanket, and the flip-flops were your pillow. And you're so tired that you sleep anywhere. Morning comes, the crack of dawn, and they had an older prisoner, older meaning not age-wise, but has been in prison for a longer period, became our so-called supervisor, in addition to the Nazi women guards with police dogs all over the place. So now, this supervisor lady is waking us up at the crack of dawn, out into the courtyard to be counted. Now, to me, after all these years, that was the most stupidest insanity. There's no other way of putting it, for us being counted. Now, think about it. Where in heavens could we have escaped to? We wore a clumsy-looking uniform. Our head is shaven. We look exhausted, not only exhausted, but we already lost weight. It looked bad. That's the simplest way of putting it. Okay, that's number one. Number two, we had Nazi women guards with police dogs watching us at every so many feet. And that's not enough. They had a soldier with a machine gun on the top of a little tower aiming a gun at us. Plus, the entire camp was surrounded by electrified barbed wire fence. You touched it and you were in heaven. That's the only way I can put it to you. So anyhow, but they kept counting us. So what does counting mean? You had to line up 5 abreast, the 500 of us. This supervisor would count us one by one, and then the German guard would count again. And now the reason I mentioned this part of it is to make you understand that this doesn't take 5 minutes. It takes an hour, 2 hours. You are so tired. And it's even though summer, but in the crack of dawn, it is cold outside. So that was a very difficult, one of the difficulties of that moment. And then, once this counting insanity is over, came what you call breakfast. Forget about the breakfast you ate today. It was nothing more than in a kettle, some green-smelling, unrecognizable things floating in that liquid. Oh, another thing, we never had any utensils like normal people have. They gave us one empty bowl. That's it. And they ladled in this horrendous smelling green stuff. So the first day, we could absolutely not touch it. It smelled so bad, everything. The old-timers kept hovering around us saying, give it to me, give it to me. And we realized that if you don't eat this, you have nothing else. So you learn to fill your stomach whatever you can. How did the day go, which was another insanity? We were not permitted the entire day from morning till night to go back to the original room where we were sleeping. So at the height of the summer weather, we had to be in this courtyard, and each barrack, they called it, that was the name of our housing, each barrack's residents were permitted to be only at a designated area. At one time, I heard that my very, very best friend was in the follow-up transport and was in another section. So I tried to sneak across this unmarked but dividing line. I was caught and I was slapped on my face that I fell down. Now, having a slap any part of your body hurts, okay? But my entire life, I was never spanked. I was a spoiled little kid, and I don't recall ever being spanked. So that was most emotionally and physically a very painful moment. So the day was just hanging around outside. So what happened that was kind of refreshing. One of my old language teacher from high school was in our group. And now she's an educated teacher. She gathered us youngsters who were her students originally and put our mind into a different world. She would say, okay, what should we talk about today? And I don't know why I said that. I said, teacher, could we talk about the French Revolution? Now, don't tell me where it came from. Maybe that was the last lesson I had in school. God knows. But the reason to mention this to you is that that was a healing effect because it got our minds completely away from reality. So that's why I call it this whole insanity. You have to have faith, fantasy, determination, and courage that tomorrow will be better. Otherwise, you will never make it. So we are at this place a couple of days. And we asked the old timers, could you please tell us how soon we are going to reconnect with our families who went that way? Inevitably, they would raise their arm and point to the 5 chimneys. That is where your parents are. Oh, come on, this is the 20th century. They don't murder people like that. I mean, that's back to the Rock Ages or whatever. Unfortunately, it was true. So what happened when that direction was, the sorting us to one line or the other line, I was chosen and my friends, some of them, to live. That's the only way I can put it to. We were destined to live, and the other row of people where my parents and other selected people were, they ended their lives right then and there. So the total experience at Auschwitz was indescribable. Many times I talk, I just wonder, okay, it was 73 years ago. Am I using my imagination or was it really true? It was so bizarre that you just want to get it out of your mind. So we were there, a group of us. Every day there was what they called a selection. A selection meant you had to line up in the courtyard, disrobe halfway, so our upper part was exposed. And I guarantee you they were not interested in our sexual beauty, but they were checking how strong our upper arms are in order that we can be eligible for work. So now came the selection. And they decided, this is an assumption, and I read history, that the ones who looked healthy enough went into one column, and the other ones to their end of life. So obviously, I was chosen to make it. So now we are a group of people. We were like 1,000 Hungarian women at that particular group. And by August 8th, all of a sudden, we get an order that we are going to move out of the camp because they need some laborers somewhere in Germany. And that is the reason why I don't have a tattoo on my arm, because it was very expedient. Like other Holocaust survivors will have the tattoo. They were so anxious they needed laborers so desperately that within one day we were on the train on the way to Germany. So now we end up in a community called Stadt Allendorf, which is located near Marburg and between Marburg and Frankfurt am Main in Germany. So now our life improves a little bit because we were put into, 1,000 of us were put into an old deserted army barrack that hasn't been used by the military maybe 100 years. I mean, it was old. But it had rooms with about 16 bunk beds. So now we didn't sleep on the floor. We slept on a bunk bed that had nothing more than straw on it. But it was certainly better than sleeping on the floor. And they gave us a horse blanket that was the most itchy thing in the world. And I have skin allergy, so you can well imagine that was not comfortable. But your body and mind is so tired that you just stretching out is a comfort. So now what was our job at the munition factory? Now remember, we are all teenagers, or 90% of us are teenagers. We have all come originally from schooling. We have never seen a factory, let alone work in a factory. But you'll be surprised when you are forced to do things, how fast you learn. So this is an ammunition factory that manufactured rockets and bombs. Have I ever seen a rocket? Have I ever seen a bomb? Probably in some movie pictures or something. And they taught us how to fill the bombs with a highly poisonous liquid material that was going through the factory. And here is this pipeline, and here's the bomb in front of your workbench. And we had to insert this pipe into the bomb, fill it with this liquid, lock it, and then 2 people had to lift it to take it to a warehouse location. It was 12-hour work per day with a short time for a light lunch, shall we say. That was like a crust of bread and maybe a pat of margarine, and that was our lunch. And 1 week we would be on day shift, and 1 week we would be on night shift. So our body chemistry was turned upside down too. But you get used to a certain time to go to sleep, and so all of a sudden it's again different. And there's another very unique thing of German ingenuity. We were walking down into the factory, okay, underground. The factory building's roof was built flat instead of vertical, horizontal, whatever that is. Anyhow, then the trees were planted on this flat roof. So when the reconnaissance Allied planes were searching the area, they saw nothing more than a beautiful green meadow. But we were right there. Okay? So now we're doing all this treacherous work, and this is getting to be about February or so. We were taken there in August, and our hair started growing out into crew cut size. So we look at one another. If your hair was black, now it's orange. Your face is lemon yellow, and your lips are dark blue. Well, in the few months' time, working without any protective garments with this highly poisonous material affected our inner body. Thank God that it didn't last much longer, because I wouldn't have the pleasure of talking to you. So now time goes on, and at the end of March, we get an order that we are going to leave the camp. They don't tell you where or how, just get ready. And now remember I told you we had those wooden flip-flops, we had no stockings, no underwear, just the uniform, and they gave us a very light spring coat. If you can visualize a miserable, rainy, windy, cold March, it was there. It was bitter cold. So now they put us on this open field, open highway, shall we say, and we are marching, and there are Nazi guards all over the place. On the 3rd day, we arrived to a farm area, and we had to stop there. And here comes fantasy big time. We are standing in front of this wheat field, a group of us, And we start fantasizing. How would it be if during the night, one by one, we crawl on our stomach, because in the distance we spotted a barn, maybe 2-3 blocks in. And we would gather in that barn and see what happens. You see, the important part here is that our self-esteem at this point is 0. So what happens? They find us, they kill us, all will be over. But nevertheless, about 20 of us made it to the barn. And then naturally we were shaking in our boots because we just expected the absolute worst. But thank God, the next morning, we're peeking out and 2 young men in a strange uniform are approaching. And it turned out to be 2 young scouts from the 6th Armored Division of the US Army, God bless them all, and they were the ones who liberated us because their captain kept finding cluster of women, 20 here, 30 there. When we tried to hide away, everybody ran wherever they could. They hid in haystacks and in attics and whatever you can imagine. So then he sent out the scouts from his soldiers and try finding the girls so we can concentrate, all of us, and see the next move. And the next move was that the captain went into the village, talked to the mayor, and said, look, here are all these women. See if we can find some accommodation for them. So the mayor arranged that each German home would give us one of their rooms. And then they would put 3-4 of us, depending on the space, to sleep there and live there. Now here comes humanity's incredible behavior. I think I told you that I spoke German fluently at that point. So now I am house guest of this family. And I interact with the people beautifully. These were country people in the villages. And it is very likely that they did not know exactly about the concentration camps, because that was kept pretty private within the Nazi system. So we took their words that they said they never heard about our incarceration. And like I said, human nature. I spoke with them, I interacted, and it was like talking to your neighbor. I mean, I couldn't carry hate. You know? So this time lasted, while we were at these German homes, till about the middle of August, and a chaplain from the military interviewed us and asked many, many questions, and one of them was, do you have any relatives around the world? And I said, yes, sir. I have 2 uncles and an aunt who moved to America in the early 1900s. The only thing I knew was their last name and Chicago. Now remember, there is no text messaging or Skype or any of the good stuff we have today. So he wrote a letter to New York to the Hebrew Immigrant Society with the information that he gained from me. So beautiful volunteers at that office kept telephoning Chicago till they connected with my family. By the way, telephone, long distance telephone call was terribly expensive. But nevertheless, they did it. They found the relatives. The relatives were elated because for 5 years they have not heard from the European family. So they got the visa and all the necessities in motion, and I arrived in Chicago September of 1946, and an interesting thing happened. I am at my relative's home, and a gentleman who came from my city but emigrated before the Second World War heard about me, knew my parents, came to visit. So out of his kindness, he came with a shopping bag filled with Hungarian books and magazines and poetry, anything Hungarian. Thank you very much. The man leaves, and my sturdy American aunt says, do you want to remain a Hungarian all your life, or do you want to learn to speak English? I said, yes, and I want to learn to speak English. She took the contents of that bag into the trash. I never saw what was written in there, but I learned to speak English. So that's how, well, so as far as just a little bit about from slavery to freedom, how do you connect with a new society of realizing that you're an orphan, you're not even 18 years old? What next? Like I said, I was one of the lucky ones because I had relatives who gave beautiful support. They had a daughter who was my age, so she took me to dances and she took me to organizational stuff that she belonged to. So my assimilation to the society came faster than when two men and women are having, Holocaust survivor background. So here I had these American people, so I learned to speak the language, I learned the American habits, and then about a month or 2 months later, my aunt took me to a family children's social service for an interview because they were the ones who could help finding a job. So the social worker interviewed me, and she said, I have a job for you in an office. So I thought, oh my God, how can I work in an office? Anyhow, I go there, and it turned out this was one of the Jewish organizations. And, in those days, now here I have to come back to old time, when you belong to an organization, for instance, and there were like 30 chapters. So the headquarter office had to prepare envelopes for the respective mailing of a meeting or a special event or whatever. And that office was in charge of preparing these things, okay? Now you just bim, boom, boom, and out it goes, but it wasn't so. So now the lady who was in charge of that office taught me how to use an addressograph. I bet you never heard that word before. An addressograph is nothing more than a little aluminum plate, like the size of your address label, and there is a punch press machine where you literally stamp in letter by letter your mailing address. I learned how to do that following a sheet of paper. I knew every single zip code in Chicago in my dream. But nevertheless, I did that for a whole year. And then I met a Hungarian doctor who came before the war. And he said, how would you like to work in my office? I said, doctor, I don't know anything. Don't worry about it. I will teach you everything. 40 magnificent years together. I became a certified medical assistant, an X-ray technician, and all the things involved in the medical office. And I made many beautiful acquaintances among the patients who to this day still remember me on holidays and whatever. So this was my professional life. And then, of course, I married a nice young man who was born in Chicago. So my English speaking even enhanced more. And we were blessed with 2 children. My daughter is somewhere in the audience. And I have a son who lives in California. I have 5 granddaughters and 3 grandsons and 2 great-great-grandchildren. So I'm a happy girl, and I share my testimony for various reasons. Number 1, I ask you to stand up to the deniers. Unfortunately, the Holocaust was very true. Second, you know what bothers me about that? If it happened, the same scenario 100 years ago, I wouldn't say a word because a letter took like a month to get from one city to the other. But today with all the high-tech stuff, you push one finger on that computer and all the authentic data is right in front of your eyes. I mean, you cannot lie, what they say now, false news or whatever the new word is. No such a thing. But they still have deniers because it's all hatred. Second, I want you to think before you hate. I'm not asking you to hate or not to hate. That is entirely up to your conscience. But at least think about it. Why do I hate that person? Especially in the teen years, when you're just developing and you are discriminated against for whatever reason. That's a very painful thing. And I can tell you personally because I had non-Jewish friends as a teenager. They were neighbors. We grew up together, and we were friends. I mean, there's no. They went to Catholic school. I went to the Jewish school. Big deal. So now comes a tragedy, and she's afraid to talk to me anymore because afraid that one of the neighbors will report her that she's associating with a Jewish person. It hurts. It hurts to be discriminated. So anyhow, like I said, think before you hate and use your best judgment. Of course, I told the Turks, stand up to the deniers, but my most important message of the entire presentation is one word: freedom. I want you to think very seriously how to protect your freedom. Because once you lose your freedom, you lost everything. We are living in a free society. Freedom is practiced in America as a showcase around the world. So let's continue to keep it that way. So I'm going to stop here. If any of you have any questions, just feel free to open up. So while you're thinking, I'll tell you what. I am at a middle school, and they are like 13, 14-year-old youngsters. But there's this nice little boy stands up, and he said to me, "Have you ever thought of changing your religion?" You know, I don't believe in stupid questions. Every question has its merit, right? I said, "Young man, I have paid a very high price for being a Jew. So now that I live in luxury, I certainly don't plan to do it." But I thought it was quite a special question. And many other things, you know, that comes up. And I speak to spread the message, to learn, to teach you over and over again that genocide doesn't happen from 1 minute to the next. It builds gradually. And you have to keep your eyes open and your ears open to do the right thing. Yes?
Did you ever question your religion?
Pardon?
Did you ever question if God was real?
Do I question God? That's a very good point. You know, when you're under this extreme tragedy, as I described to you, you are thinking, oh my God, right? But I grew up in a religious family. Now, whether that was a crutch that I held out to, or among us were very religious people who come from extremely religious families, whatever the reason, which translates to that they knew the prayer books by heart. What these people would do, I don't know how they would know that it was the Sabbath or it might be a holiday, but I don't know. So what they would do, they would take us younger ones, and we would hide behind the latrines, which are the toilets, because that was the only place where they were not watching us every instant. And she would lead the prayers, and many of us went to Hebrew studies, so we knew the good part of that prayer, so we would walk. And that gave us faith. And like I said earlier, in order to survive, you had to have faith and fantasy and believe that tomorrow will be better. And I still live by that mantra, you know? But that's how it goes. Yes?
Did you ever go back to your hometown?
Do I ever go back to my hometown? Yes, I go back for one very important reason. Well, until years ago, I had a few cousins who remained in Hungary, and I would visit with them. But the main reason I went back to Hungary was to go to the Jewish cemetery, because as I described to you, my parents have no gravesite. Okay? So my grandparents and maybe 300 years of family history from that same town, I had relatives in the cemetery. So I pay my respect because I am not the last one in the family who will ever do that. So, and then I still have some school friends that I get in touch with. You know, they're all dying out, but nevertheless. So that is about the only motivation that I do have to return to Hungary. I mean, Hungary is a beautiful country, but I mean, all the memories are pretty sad. So, yes.
You said that there was a couple times where you basically were like you either went that way or that way, and you said that you didn't actually know what would happen to the people that would go the other way. Like, at what point did it all kind of hit you that, like, what you exactly you just
At that time, I didn't know the difference between this column or that column. That takes a long time way after. So at that point, I couldn't answer you that what I thought. By that time, you are nothing more than a zombie. Go this way, go that way, and you just follow orders, and that's how you live from morning till night. So I could not give you a real answer here.
like, so it was just like a long time after.
But you know what? I still believe in God, and I feel that I was destined to live. There's just no other way of putting it. After all, I had cousins, I had girlfriends who were my age, young girls, strong girls, smart girls, and they ended up on the other side. So I call it the roll of dice. I was here so I can meet you. But anyhow, these were the events, and if you come up with any questions afterwards, tell your teacher.
Did you say you had a brother?
Oh, my brother. Oh, thank you. I didn't want to forget him. Now that was a miracle of miracles. When we were liberated, I was staying in Germany because I really didn't know what my future holds. Until you get acclimated to the new freedom, you have no money to come from one country to another country and all those luxuries. But nevertheless, I am in Germany, and two young Hungarian men are combing the area looking for relatives. Lo and behold, one of the young men happened to be my brother's childhood boyfriend. First question, have you seen Michael? Yes, I have good news for you, I have bad news for you. The good news is I saw him Christmas time 44 in Budapest. Now that was an unknown phenomenon for me. I thought that all the Jewish people were out of the country. But what I found out later, we from the outlying areas were moved by the Nazis out of the country, and the Jewish people out of Budapest were safe to be the last group. So we were taken out in May, June, and in July, President Roosevelt and the Pope intervened with the Hungarian president and said, stop the deportations. The war was looking already, they're gonna lose anyhow. So anyhow, he obeyed that order. So the Budapest people remained in Budapest, okay? But they suffered a more horrendous death on this earth. This is summer, we are taken out, they are in the country yet, and by September or so, the government becomes as anti-Semitic, as worse than the Nazis. This particular Hungarian leader was the head of the Nazi party, Hungarian Nazi party, and he gains prominence to be the leader of the country. So now he figures, okay, let's finish the job. So the Budapest people were marched to the Danube, the whole area. They would take 10 people and put a wire around them, tie them together, shoot one bullet into one person, and that person would pull the 10 people into the bitter cold river. And that's how they perished. So, it was an ugly death. Terrible, terrible, terrible death. So these were the happenings over there. Back to my brother. So I couldn't figure out how could he be in Budapest at that particular time. What has happened to him until 1939, when all the Nuremberg laws were happening, which translate to anti-Jewish laws that took place in Germany, was accepted in the Hungarian government. So anti-Jewish laws started happening one after another in Hungary. So when you are a military age, in 18 or 20, whatever, I don't remember, and you enter the military. So now they brought an anti-Jewish law that the Jewish boys could no longer wear the country's uniform nor bear arms. However, he still had to enter this military unit in the civilian clothing. I had to have a yellow armband on their arm indicating further that they are Jewish. And they were not under the supervision of the Hungarian military. And they were given the most disgusting jobs imaginable. And they were treated as brutally as the Nazis did. So now what happens to my brother? January of 1945, the Russians liberate Hungary from the Nazis, okay? So my brother is very happy to be free. He walks down the street and a Russian soldier arrests him. And he tries to explain, look, I just came from hell. They would not listen. And he ends up as a prisoner in Archangels all the way in Siberia. During his job is to work in a paper mill factory. And during the summer, he had to go out into the swamps to cut down trees to make paper. And a mosquito bit him. And he develops malaria. Malaria is a debilitating illness. You get chills and fevers alternately. On the 1 second you're hot, next minute you're freezing. So now with this illness in the Russian prison, 3 years after they sent him home as a very sick man. 3 years after means 1948, which translates to that I am long in America already. So again, we have another problem here. The United States is in a Cold War with the Russians at that time frame, which translates to that your letters are censored between the two countries, and it's just, there's no other communication. Phones are beyond our means at that point, phone calling. So nevertheless, it took me till 1962 to reconnect with him, because in 1960, there was a new law where they allowed some people to emigrate to other countries. And he ended up in Italy, where Jewish agencies helped find housing and whatever necessary. And by that time, then we could communicate, and I would send him packages and so forth. So we finally got him to the country by then. And he was a very intelligent young man, much smarter than I, and totally different in personality. As a big blabbermouth as I am, he was very quiet, but he had that very unique European politeness. And we had him till 2010 when he passed on. But thanks for asking. So yes.
We have a couple of comments and questions from our live stream.
Oh, online,
audience
yes.
as well.
How high-tech can you get?
I'll read you the comments first, and then I'll give you the question.
Okay.
So one of the questions, let me hand this to you. Let's see, we got you. Oh, we got you. All right. So one of the comments was, "Hello, we appreciate you taking your time to share your story. Thank you, and sorry for what recently happened. The community is in my thoughts." And then the other comment is, "In lieu of recent events in our very own hometown, the residents of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, via..." Oh, I think these microphones don't like each other, so maybe we'll pause that for a second. "In lieu of recent events, our very own hometown, the residents of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, via Schiller STEAM Academy, personally value your sacrifice, experience, and contribution to humanity." So now we're getting a couple of questions. The first question is, "Dear Magda, thank you for sharing your story. My question to you is, as students, what do you think is the best way we can help to educate others about the Holocaust in our classrooms and communities?"
Well, the best way is the things you heard here, the things that I commented about or called your attention to carry on and share it with your friends. I mean, that's one-on-one communication can go far. And of course, if anybody is interested, I have a high-tech granddaughter, and she created a website, magdabrown.com, and some of my presentations are listed there in full form. So they can look at that and learn further. So there's a lot to learn from this experience. And if they apply it to the good, that's my biggest thank you ever.
Another question is, what are your thoughts on how we should respond to what happened here on Saturday?
Continue with protecting your freedom. And don't pass judgment until you find out both sides of the happenings, whatever happens in your life. Don't jump to the gun, as they say. But think about it, weigh it, and see what is the best thing that your conscience and your heart dictates. And I think that all of these children have an intelligent mind, and I trust that they will remember that and pass on the words.
And then another question was, do you know or have you ever met Anne Frank?
I have not met Anne Frank because I was in a different camp. Anne Frank was in Bergen-Belsen, which was another concentration camp, and I was in Auschwitz, so that's two different locations. Also, there were thousands and thousands of people, and of course, she comes from a different country, so that would make a difference. But I wish I did, but of course, all of us have read her book, so it is remarkable how that little book became a learning experience for schools, a teaching experience. Because everywhere I go, and I ask the teacher, oh yes, they all read it, they all knew about it, we all talked about it. So yes, I like tell her that I wish that I have.
Well, she hears you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have online for right now.
Well, thank you very much.
I have a question.
And
Oh, there's more questions. Good.
okay,
How do you feel about
Oh,
Germany today?
Hold on one moment.
okay, that's a good one.
Let me turn your microphone back on.
It just doesn't like that microphone. So
Okay.
once you're going to want to walk away from
I'll
this
walk
microphone.
I follow orders. All right, your question was, what do you think about Germany today? Well, I have a German boyfriend.
Woo!
Want to hear more? He's altogether 32 now. But, okay, let me be a little bit more serious. In Germany, about 60 years ago, a Church of Ascension got together the leadership, and they were thinking about what could we do for humanity. So the management decided, how would it be if we take high school graduates and educate them for a while, a couple of months training period, how to go out into the world and interact with people who have war-torn countries, disabled people. It was not a Jewish issue. So the Holocaust museums have heard about this some years back, and they took a giant step forward. First of all, the management started to dare invite a German child among the Holocaust survivors. Will there be a ill feeling? And, they waited. And the director says, you know what? If you don't try, how will we know? And it worked out fantastically well. So now I go to my darling Gregor. What has happened? The German youngster, your age, would come for a year and work at our Holocaust Museum in Illinois. And naturally, he would get to meet all the survivors. And he is a very loving young man, very intelligent. And like I said, he's altogether 19 years old. And I am spending a lot of time at the museum making presentations. So I become very close friends with him. So one time it was like getting in the fall time, winter time. I said, Gregor, you have to take 2 buses to come to the Holocaust Center to do your work, and blah, blah, blah. It's too much traveling, and it's cold and snowy or whatever. Bring a toothbrush. I have an empty bedroom. I'll feed you, and you can stay at my house. I live across the street from the museum. You will have 2.5 seconds to get to work. And this became the beginning of a lifelong friendship. So much so that this morning we got an email from him. He could listen in Berlin to my presentations from last night. What is it called?
Live streaming?
Live stream, I never know that. Anyhow, so is that remarkable? So that's why I call it my German boyfriend, because I had the good fortune to be invited to this organization's 60th anniversary in Berlin a few months ago. The title is called Action, Reconciliation, Service for Peace. And these high school graduates are the most dedicated human beings around the world. So I was invited to their 60th anniversary, and naturally I spoke at their openings, and I spoke at the church, and I spoke at my friend's high school, former high school, and so on. But altogether, it was a beautiful experience, because you see, today's Germany is not the Nazi era. It's totally different. And I was treated as warmly and welcomed as a relative would be. So I always kind of throw a line here, you know, how do you like my German boyfriend? Because it's a shocker after you hear all the tragedies. So the bottom line is, like I said earlier, think before you hate. I don't hate anyone. I want to go to the great beyond with a clear conscience. And you know, I'll tell you one short one, then I'll stop. I spoke in New Zealand, and I spoke at an annual Eucharistic Catholic convention. There were like 2,000 people, and anyhow, I did my presentations, and after that, I am sitting alone in the dining hall, and a young man approaches me. Excuse me, can I sit down? And sure. And he's talking on, and you know, sometimes you just have to listen where the person is going. It turns out finally he said, both my grandfathers were Nazi officers. So now, when I look in the picture of Jesus Christ, could I see your face in it with forgiveness? Now that's a powerful request, right? So I said, young man, if you would have asked me this question in the very early days, right after the liberation, I could not have given you an intelligent answer, because the pain was so acute. But I have forgiven everybody. We see our holiest holidays, the Day of Atonement, where we fast and we pray to God to forgive our sins from the previous year, so we can start the year anew with a clear heart. And then I threw a little line, I hope God forgives me. I said, and it helps the perpetrators as well to start with a clean heart. But if you have seen a face of relief on the child's look, it was worth $1 million. Because a grandfather is a grandfather, you know? I mean, you love him one way or another. So here he was like 22 years old. He was living with this turmoil, you know, which way to go. So a lot of interesting things are happening as this conversation starts. So do we have any more questions from
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We do.
You said that there are two men that escaped Auschwitz.
Wait. My hearing is going, my children say.
You said that there were only two men that ever escaped Auschwitz. Do you know like how they escaped?
Repeat. I didn't quite.
How did the two men escape Auschwitz?
How did what?
How did the two men escape from Auschwitz?
How
Do you
did-
know how they escaped?
Who? Wait, I am mixed up
Okay.
now. I'm embarrassed.
You had said that there were only two men that escaped from the concentration.
Oh, I heard about it. The two men who escaped. I heard about it from somewhere. I cannot give you a concrete answer on that. But I mean, that must be documented somewhere. But I'm sorry I couldn't give you well. I just, you know, the children say my hearing is going, but I'm in denial. Yeah.
So there's a few questions from online. If you're going to come close, I'm going to turn your microphone off again. There you are. And so a couple people are asking if you keep in touch with anybody that you met in the camps.
Yes, I do keep in touch with a few of them, because unfortunately we're dying out. But I Skype. I'm a high-tech grandma. And I have one dear friend who lives in Hungary, and we Skype. And there are only about 3 of us. There's one who lives locally. We were together all the way and happened to settle in my community. But she is the exact opposite of me. A lovely, lovely lady, and her English skills are fine. She used to be a sales lady, so she would be talking to customers, so naturally she could communicate. But sometimes I take her with me to a presentation, and of course I introduce her. She stands up, she's altogether like 4'9", and looks at the audience and points at me, says one word, "She is my mouthpiece." That's it. She refuses to talk about it. So there are many of us survivors who will absolutely will not just shut it off of their lives. They will always remember, but so I cover for them too.
That's so great. And then, do you remember times of happiness during your childhood? If so, can you talk about some of them?
Lots of happiness to remember. I remember when I was like 2nd grade or something like that, and I was in a show on stage. And I was so clumsy. Oh, God. That talent I didn't have. But the joy of having my parents in the audience, it was a magnificent experience.
Someone said, you stated, "I still believe in God." How did you continue to strengthen your relationship during such times of tragedy? You did mention.
I did mention, and I repeat that, I don't know, is it upbringing? I give credit to that. It was the normal religious household. I mean, you go to services, you recognize all the holidays, your meals are according to Jewish laws. So I didn't know any other way. And I'm not sorry for being brought up that way, because believing in God was pounded into my head, shall we say, and it remained with me. I told you earlier, too, that I have happened to be a positive thinker. And I try to see the cup half full.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, I look at the good things that here I am at 91 to be able to stand in front of you and inform the audience of what has been and all the beautiful people listening, even though it's time for lunch already and they are fading out. They are putting up a good front.
We'll ask one more question and then we'll let. Oh, actually, we have one more question here. Sure.
How did you recover?
How did I recover from that trauma? You do and you don't. I had many wonderful mentors post-war. I told you that I had the relatives who were treating me like one of their children. Then I came my marriage, where I had, you see, there's another important part here that you don't even think about. My children were luckier than other survivors, but both of them were survivors, because there are no grandparents. And marrying an American-born young man, my children had the luxury of grandparents, aunts and uncles and cousins, and that's a great plus. I mean, think about yourselves. All of you have loving relatives and ones who tolerate. But nevertheless, it was a great plus to recover, because I had all this support.
Great. I think we're good.
We're done. Now, how about that? And you were just
there's questions keep coming, but we can let them.
Well, then shut me up. But I'm so happy you kids are really listening or put all your best smile forward. So I thank you for it 1,000,000 times, and keep up the freedom. And then we'll go on with other things.
Thank you all. Thank you.
They were fantastic. I have to tell the teacher, they are getting an A+.
And I think an A+ to everyone who is watching from afar If I can ask one favor to all of you tuning into our live stream, if someone wherever you are would let us know how many people are watching in each location, so we can have a sense of how many people we reached with this program. And I'm watching Jackie Reese, who's handled all our technology for today, to see if you all are responding. Thank you very much. Thank you, Magda. You inspire all of us, and having you here now has meant so much to us and to our community, and I can't thank you enough.
You're entirely welcome. It was my pleasure, and truly they are a fantastic audience.
Indeed.
And I can tell, I see a couple of young people. I gotta tell you a funny one, and we go home. I am at the museum, this is like maybe 10 years ago, whatever, and the director of the Speakers Bureau is walking out with a group of visitors, teenagers, and whispers to my ear, said, Meadow, watch out, this is a very tough audience. I think to myself, okay, how can I tell my story, tough or happy audience? So now, here I am in front of these kids, and they were like all ages, from 15 to like 22. It was not a regular 17, 16-year-old group, but I don't know any of the background. So it is November 1. I figured, okay, let's cheer up the group. I said, I recognize the fact that last night was Halloween. All of you are sugared up, so if you doze off, I'll forgive you. Sure enough, in the back, one young man literally fell asleep. So I did this talk, and anyhow, afterwards, I conversed with the teacher. And I said, I hope you didn't mind and all that stuff. And I said, I was in the front row, and two kids asked me a question, and I absolutely could not understand them. Not hear them, I could not understand them. They were with some kind of a slang. And he said to me, Mrs. Brown, I teach them 5 days a week. Half the time, I don't understand what they're saying. So, it was turned out to be, these were children who were working towards their GPS, what's the word? That stuff. And so they had all ages, to gain that certificate. So, but it was really a unique experience. Because here you are pretty much concentrated of high school levels. But anyhow, otherwise, it just goes on, and I firmly believe that all of you put a little bit of this in your memory bank and become great people. How's that? Okay? All right.
We'll sign off.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you all for tuning in.